What's up, Internet? We just hit 2,000 subscribers. How crazy is that? Well, it's pretty crazy for me. I'm excited. I know it's been like a decade since I started to get to this point, but you know what? It's more success than I've had in anything in my whole life. Don't take this from me, please. We are back with another collection of awesome games. My game collection. This time, as voted on by the Discord, we are covering the single greatest console of all time. A console so universally beloved, I don't even need to tell you what it's called, because we all just know what I'm talking about. We're all in agreement about this. But that said, this is my favorite console of all time, the legendary Sega Saturn. Now, my history with Sega Saturn was a little bit weird because, I mean, first and foremost, as much as I do love this, and it is unironically my favorite console of all time, I will be the first to tell you that I lost that console generation more than anyone else. Like, I'm the biggest fan of RPGs, and I got a Saturn for my birthday, and no RPGs in sight. In fact, you could only rent games for it for a few different rental shops. My local place had about a small rack of them, and then like my specialty rental store, which was very far away, they had like 2 whole shelves of Saturn stuff, but no RPGs. And you could only rent them for about 2 months because the Saturn didn't sell for very long over here. So unfortunately, that was not so good. And then I got an N64, which had all of 4 RPGs, and let's just be honest, only maybe 2 of them were actually good. So I really should have gotten a Sony PlayStation, and I, to this day, lament that and my total Sony illiteracy in that regard. I really do need to invest more in the PlayStation, but games for that are so expensive. Anyway, I didn't have too many games for the Saturn. I had a demo disc, I had like a multi-pack-in disc, as well as I had a copy of Sonic 3D Blast, which is the only good version of it out there. I've got a full review of that, you should go take a look, but unfortunately that's been misplaced. I do have it somewhere, but I haven't seen it in years. And I had like one other game, and I'll talk about that when we get there. But then, probably when I was going straight into high school, my family decided to, well, my parents specifically decided to sell pretty much all my games to a pawn shop, but free. That's a thing that to this day I'm still not over and I'm very angry about. But for my college senior year, for my birthday, I bought myself a birthday present because that's how my birthdays be. And I bought myself another Sega Saturn and one game to go with it. And a few years later, I started this YouTube channel, and I started collecting imports for the Saturn. And that's where the key to all this is coming from, because the Saturn is primarily for collectors an import console, because domestic releases were very, very few and far between, and are ungodly expensive. To give you a sense of how much money I saved on an import Saturn versus like a non-import Saturn collection, the very first single one game I bought for it, the very first import I bought for it, the difference between a domestic version and the import version I bought the copy of the game, I bought my Saturn, and I bought an import card, and I could have done that 3 more times. The cost of one single domestic release game in triplicate is more expensive than my Saturn, my import card, and the game itself. So, yeah, if you're getting Saturn games, absolutely go and get imports. They just had more games, they had some interesting stuff we never got, and it's just infinitely more expensive to buy domestic titles, and it's significantly harder to. Oh god, I'm never getting Panzer Dragoon Saga. And now I'm really, really sad. But before we talk about games, this little device I'd like to show off a little bit. This is a Satiator, and the Satiator was this tiny little device. It's about the size of a credit card. It slots into a Model 2 Saturn, and you could play games by skipping the laser. It's a laser bypass, so you don't have to worry about your discs rotting eventually, which is a concern about all optical media, but especially Saturn seem to be extra affected by it. And you don't have to worry about your laser ever dying because you're just playing it off an SD card effectively. It's great, but unfortunately the slot on my Saturn died, so I can't even use this anymore. I'm so sad. It's ungodly expensive too. This thing was like $450. But as what I would like to call myself the biggest Saturn fan on the planet, it was absolutely worth it. But yeah, unfortunately, it's ungodly expensive. Very cool item, but it's just sad that I could not actually use it. Now, most of the stuff is going to be in alphabetical order, most of it, but some of the stuff wasn't on my shelf when I took it off, so it's a little bit sort of loose. But this is mostly going to be alphabetical, and this is my mostly Sega Saturn, or mostly import Sega Saturn collection, rather, because just ordering domestically is just insane. So let's start with this one. This is Anarch Fantasy Stories, first volume. I don't know if they ever actually made a second volume. I think this was a tie-in with an anime or a manga. And this is an RPG. The reason I bought this was the summer that I started importing Saturn games, I had this hankering. I wanted to get through Japanese RPGs without a guide, without any idea what it was. And I bought a few import Saturn games, or RPGs specifically, to try and do that. And I was looking for one specifically because I remember there being this one game that got re-released on the GBA in English I really wanted to play, and that way I had a fallback. In case I couldn't figure out where it was, I could look up a guide on the English version. Unfortunately, that was a different game altogether. I can't even think of what it was called. In fact, I don't even think that game was originally on the Saturn. I think it was a PlayStation game. Again, adding more salt into the wounds that I haven't played the PlayStation, but I could not get very far in this game. I think the furthest I ever got was I got stuck in the opening town. I just could not leave it. So that was not the best, but I do appreciate that all the Japanese games actually have English titles on the side. So that was not my best import. Next we have one on the opposite side. I actually really love this game. I'd like to play it again. We have Arcana Strikes. This is a card battling RPG, and in fact, I think even came with a little card inside. I've got a gameplay video of this back when I first played it, and I thought this game was really approachable, a lot of fun, and it was good. It was a good RPG, it was approachable, it was fun. For some reason the case isn't closing, and that's really bugging my OCD. But yeah, if you want a cool RPG that's an import, this one might be worth it. If you like cards. I actually really don't care for cards very much, but I had a lot of fun with Arcana Strikes, and I thought it was a lot of fun. And I think that would definitely be an RPG worth considering, for sure. Alright, next we have a game that, unfortunately, I don't have the cover art for. This is Baku Animal. I've actually shown this game off in various ways, shapes, and forms several times. I've shown off the, I believe, Master System version on my Master Drive multi-card as well. This is a block-falling puzzle game, which means I'm god-awful at them. But this one's pretty cool. It reminds me the most of that Pac-Man one, where you drop like the little pieces with the Pac-Mans that would then follow a path and eat the ghost. It's kind of like that, if you've ever played that game. But basically, blocks come in two flavors. You've got animal blocks and food blocks. And they each come in 4 colors. You have blue bones that can be eaten by dogs, green bamboo that can be eaten by pandas. You have orange carrots that can be eaten by rabbits, and you get yellow bananas that can be eaten by monkeys. And basically, it's just a versus puzzle thing. What's really particularly weird about this game, though, is the domestic release. I actually have seen a copy of this, and I lament not buying it because it was actually really cheap when I saw it, but it's better I didn't, because every domestic release of the Saturn version, for whatever reason, has the story completely gutted from it. And to be fair, the story is not much more than the Puyo Puyo, oh, we're 2 characters in the same place, let's fight about it, but at the same time, you know, it's still kind of dumb that we got such a watered down version. But Baku Animal, that is a very, very cool game, and it's a great puzzle game. It's easy to pick up and play. You should absolutely try it if you get the chance. As I knock over my water. Alright, this one might be of interest to some people. This is Biohazard. I feel like I don't have to explain what this is, but if you're unfamiliar, as you can see right here, it's survival horror. What this is Resident Evil. This is the original Resident Evil, and what's most interesting is, in spite of the fact that Resident Evil has since been remade numerous times and updated and remastered and all that good stuff, this is still the definitive edition. Like, I say that because it has stuff that is in no other version of it. and only the Japanese set version. The English version had some weird stuff cut from it as well. But you had an exclusive zombie type that I think was like based on cockroaches. You had a second gold tyrant that fights you at the end of the game. You had a zombie Wesker that would run around and you could fight. And there was like a survival mode tied to all of it as well. So basically you had like a whole second game stapled onto Resident Evil, and you just had like the most complete version of it, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, I can't read Japanese, but fortunately it is recorded entirely in English, so it's not too bad to get around. But I'm not the biggest original Resident Evil fan ever. And, well, there was no Resident Evil or Biohazard 2 on the Saturn, but I'll explain that later. But if you're looking for the definitive version of Biohazard or Resident Evil, you need the Japanese Sega Saturn version. Again, thus definitively proving the Sega Saturn was, in fact, the greatest console of all time. As, there's the title. Our next game is Blue Seed, and, you know, similar to Anarch Fantasy, I think I bought this, again, because I was looking for one specific game that was remade on the GBA, and I thought it was a Saturn game, but I'm pretty sure it was a PS1 game. But this is, I believe, also tied in with an anime. Also, judging by that yellow sticker, it's 18 plus. So there might be some risque situations here. But this is an RPG that, if I remember, was a tie-in with an anime, and it had like card battling mechanics that would like then turn to like animated cutscene fights. It was kind of weird, and I didn't get very far. But again, it was more of an experiment just to see if I can actually play through Japanese RPGs without a translation. And this one, not so much. But, you know, again, it's an interesting experiment I wanted to try. Alright, the next game we have is Choro Q Park. And unlike the other games in this series, it actually bears the name of the series on it. But to be fair, it's also like the Japanese version. This is one of the very long-running Choro Q games. It's the only one on the Saturn. And this is a weird one because, of course, the Choro Q games are pull-back, wind-up toy cars. And this game was a racing game that sort of tried to capitalize that in a physical sense, like in the racing itself, because basically the game operates sort of like a strategy game slash racing game with relay race mechanics, because at certain points on any track, you can swap to different cars that you've pre-planned at those destinations because your character's like wind-up meter is going down. You can skip swapping as well if you've got enough wind-up, but every car can handle like a different a series of obstacles, and like some will be better for curves and straightaways and stuff like that. It's an interesting game, and again, it's Choro Q, and I want to collect them all anyway. And it's a Saturn Choro Q, which means it's pretty much a compilation of all the cool things at once. And I do love Choro Q. Alright. Next we have, this one's pretty important to me. This is Christmas Nights into Dreams. I've shown this game off a couple times. This is it's hard to describe Christmas Nights into Dreams because this is basically a one-level demo of Nights into Dreams, but it's Christmas themed. But, and here's the interesting thing, it has arguably as much, if not more, content than the base game it's a demo of. Because this is one level that you can play with both characters from the original Nights into Dreams, but it has like a special like calendar setting, and if you play the game at certain times, like if you play it on Christmas, you'll get like a different skin. If you play it on New Year's, you'll get like a New Year's countdown and like a different world skin. If you play it on April Fool's Day, you can play as the villain from the previous game. There was a mode where you get to play as Sonic the Hedgehog and fight a big balloon Dr. Robotnik. There was a lot of unlockables in this game, and they weren't just tied to dates, although some of them were. And, you know, I just think this is such an interesting thing because, first of all, it's a demo. And it's a demo of a game I love, but it's a demo that has so much content that it's basically a game unto itself, and it almost eclipses the main game. And I think the thing that really guts me about this is when they went and remade Nights into Dreams digitally, they included this as an unlockable, but they kind of took away all the fun unlocks in this game, so it's literally just a Christmas skin to one level. And that just... man, that doesn't feel very good. They kind of cut the soul out of this. But it's an interesting, fun little Christmas adventure, and it's one of the few Christmas-themed games you can get, and it's quite a cool little game. I quite liked Christmas Nights only this winter, and I think a lot of people should play it. Alright, this one's kind of interesting. So I've actually reviewed the first half of this. I meant to review the second half, but then all my footage got corrupted. This is Clockwork Knight. But what's interesting is this is a special version of Clockwork Knight, because first of all, if I can, comes with this, which if we pop it out, is actually a stand-up Clockwork Knight calendar for 1996. And this is just a fun little extra that came in here. But this game itself is particularly interesting because, as I try and cram that back in there, this is going to be a whole mess. The original Clockwork Knights was a game that was not very long. I believe it was, what was it, like 4 areas, and each area had like 3 levels in it or something like that. It wasn't very long. And then not very long after, they made a sequel to this game. And the whole thing was it was supposed to be played as one singular adventure. Well, this is the Japanese release that came out after the second game in North America that combined the two. So you actually have 2 games on one disc. So this is actually Clockwork Knight 1 and 2. And what's particularly interesting is that Clockwork 2 in North America had a bunch of extra stuff that was added to it that got re-added into this version. So not only are you getting a value pack, you're getting a value pack with a really cool little physical thing, but you're also getting a value pack that has extra content from the North American version. And it's only missing one thing. Only one. And it's not even necessarily missing it. It was weird. See, the original Japanese release of the second game, you had to replay the final level of the first game because there's continuity between the two. In the North American release, they kind of just had a cutscene instead. There's no cutscene here. This is the full both Japanese releases with extra stuff. But otherwise, it's a great little compilation, and if you're looking for Clockwork Knight, this is the most affordable way to play both games, and I believe it added like 2 extra characters that weren't in the original North American releases as well, which is really quite cool. This guy, he was included, I believe, in the second game, and then they added an extra character specifically for this version, although I don't remember how to unlock him. But again, if you're looking for Clockwork Knight, this is the most affordable way to play both games, because, again, I think I paid $15, maybe $20 for this, and like the first game costs like $70, $80 or something like that. So, again, you're saving a lot of money, plus you get a lot of content, and some exclusive stuff, plus a really cool little bonus thing, which is pretty neat. Alright, this is kind of sad. This is Cube Battler, the story of Anna. This was a game I actually bought specifically because I wanted to make a what the hell is video of it, and I tried, and like the game just sort of freaked out on me a little bit. Like I could not get the basic controls to work. It's sort of a hard to explain game. It's a head-to-head puzzle game where you get like a series of cubes that depict a picture, but you have to like flip them because they're like inverted and they're backwards and they're upside down and all sorts of stuff, and you have to basically create the picture to attack your opponent or whatever. It's a very weird game, and it was split into 2 games because now I'm going to bring up the other one, which is Cube Battler Story of Show. So these 2 kind of effectively make the same game. They play identically, but it's all about sort of flipping cube puzzles around to try and ultimately defeat an opponent to do more puzzle cube flipping. But yeah, 2 Cube Battler games. I bought these to do a what the hell is video, and it kind of fell on its face pretty quick. And I feel bad about that because I really wanted to do that because it seemed like such an interesting game. Alright, this is a really cool game. This is Cyber Troopers Virtual On. This is in fact, I believe it's an update version, as it says up there, which I think includes the online update that was a special release in North America. But basically, Virtual On, if you're not familiar, was a robot fighting game. I showed off a little bit of footage on this when I reviewed good old Galaxy Fight, the most generic, worst fighting game on the Saturn, because this was just so much better. And yeah, it's a Sega classic arcade game. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Gotcha Force. Not totally, but a little bit. And, you should give Virtual On a shot if you like mech one-on-one fighters and shooters, because it's a fun little arcadey slice of Sega action, and it is excellent. And to have a home version of like this on the Saturn, it runs so well, and it is an excellent game. Alright, I'm gonna put that aside. because next we have Daytona USA Circuit Edition. Unfortunately, I do not have the vocal stylings of Mitsuyoshi. But what's interesting is this actually was a remake of the original Daytona USA, which to me is one of the most iconic arcade games ever. Fun story, I have a personal rule where whenever I go into an arcade, it's been a while, the first game I play and the last game I play is always Daytona USA. I played a lot of the original on here, and this is basically an update to the original Daytona USA, but it has a couple extra tracks, it has a lot of extra cars, has a completely revamped soundtrack featuring Sons of Angels, which is a pre-name changed Crush 40, which is like unironically my favorite band. And you know, that was before they did the Sonic the Hedgehog theme songs, and that's really quite cool. The soundtrack to this game is absolutely jammin', and you know, if you like Daytona USA, this is just peak Daytona USA. It runs so much better. Like, I love the original Daytona USA on the Saturn, but it does not run very well. But this is so much better. It looks better. It has so much more stuff. I believe it actually had some online features as well, hence why it says net down there. This is basically the definitive version of Daytona USA for the Sega Saturn, and it's very cool. Alright, so remember how I mentioned a little while ago how I had good old Biohazard, and they never made a Biohazard 2? Yeah, so when every place got Resident Evil 2, except the Saturn, Sega was kind of freaking out, because they knew what a big deal Resident Evil really was. And I mean, the N64 got it. Come on. Seriously? So, Sega decided, we're not getting Resident Evil 2, so we'll make it ourselves. And this is what we got. This is Deep Fear. I've shown this game off a couple times, but hereafter we will have Desperate Days with Nowhere to Escape. This is a survival horror game set in an undersea research facility, where you get attacked by like sea creatures and like these like modified water zombies and stuff. It's a very weird game. I showed this off last Halloween as just a fun little thing to test out my Satiator. Not that I'm still upset I can't use it anymore. Yeah, I really am. But this is a really cool game. It's entirely in English. This was actually released in the West in the PAL territories, where it is ungodly expensive, but it was never released in North America, which is kind of a shame, because it's really quite a good little, well, basically Resident Evil knockoff. But, you know, if you like Resident Evil games and you got a Saturn, you should give Deep Fear a look, because it's its own unique thing, and it's genuinely a very good, unique thing. You know, I think that this is a must-have if you're getting a Saturn and you're importing. I mean, you can only get this if you import. And because it is like the original Resident Evil, it's entirely in English, even the Japanese versions. Like, you know, the dialogue, the text won't be, but you can kind of figure it out as you play. But Deep Fear, very, very good game, and I think it's a must-have. Alright, ooh, I reviewed this forever ago. This is Dungeon Master Nexus. This was part of the long-running Dungeon Master series, and it is a first-person, sort of like real-time dungeon-crawling RPG. I kind of want to go back and play this game, actually, but you basically, first-person, you select a bunch of heroes, you form a team, you go into a dungeon, you fight some monsters, you collect some loot, and you try and get to the bottom of it. There's a lot I haven't been able to figure out about this game. Like, the magic system in this game makes absolutely no sense to me, because the only thing I understand is you have to combine a bunch of runes and then stuff happens, but I can't really figure out what. But there are a lot of really clever little puzzles in this game. Like, at one point you find this really cool staff and you pick it up, and then suddenly like the ceiling tries to crush you, so you put it back down and the pressure plate goes back. And then later on in that dungeon you can find like a stick, pick it up, go back and swap it out. But then there are like some really convoluted games that really test your sort of creative thinking skills, where at one point, and this point, I was actually dying because there's like survival elements. All my teams were like starving and thirsty, and like they were just all dying because I couldn't figure out how to open up this one door to, you know, advance to the next level. And what you had to do was you had to like go to this pit and stand on this like this switch, and then throw a rock or something across the way, and then hit a lever. And then when you hit that lever, it would activate a teleporter in midair to teleport the rock to behind the door it was going to unlock. And I swear that took me hours of just sitting here banging my head against the wall trying to figure out, and I felt so goddamn proud of myself that I figured that out eventually. But yeah, this is a really cool dungeon crawling experience. If you like the first-person dungeon crawler games, grab this. Honestly, I'm not that big into the turn or the first-person ones. I like this one because it's a little bit more live, real-time as opposed to turn-based, but I'm not that big into those kind of games. But still, this game is so clever and so stupid at the same time, but it's very, very interesting, and it is actually pretty easy to play, excluding like the magic system if you don't know Japanese. So this one might be a RPG worth looking into, especially if you like the first-person dungeon crawlers. It's a lot of fun, and I made a review forever ago about it, but damn if I didn't like Dungeon Master Nexus, in spite of its jank, as I knocked down something from the next pile. Alright, our next game is, oh man, I reviewed this forever ago too. Here's a fun story. I reviewed this game under the wrong name because I used the English name all the way through, and as I put out the review, I decided to go back and like change all that stuff, so I don't think I ever actually reviewed the game by proper title, and I'm so embarrassed about it, but this is Dynamite Deca. And Dynamite Deca was released in North America as Die Hard Arcade. It became a tie-in to Die Hard, which is like the greatest Christmas movie ever. But, you know, you get to play as Bruce Willis over here, known as Bruno Dillinger. You have to save the president's daughter from this guy. He's sitting at the president's desk, and she's just sitting under the desk, just staring at him the entire time, just to show how inept not Hans Gruber is. But it's a really creative beat-em-up with a ton of personality, a lot of fun. It is very, very difficult, but the fights, the individual encounters, all the weapons and stuff, this is a must-have if you like beat-em-ups. It got a sequel on the Dreamcast called Dynamite Cop, and it even got a weird like sequel to that, only available in, I believe, China in the arcades, where it got completely reskinned. But yeah, it's a great little thing. And fun side note, apparently my camera recognizes this face as a face because it's focusing on that, and I didn't tell it to do that. But either way, I think this is a must-have for the Saturn. It's just a great arcade game, tons of fun, and it's just a bonkers good time. Good old Dynamite Deca or Die Hard Arcade, whichever way that is. There we go. That's a must-have. Absolutely. Oh, and we got another one. This is one I gotta review at some point. This is Fighters Mega Mix. The most, like, just balls-out insane fighting game you will ever find. This is very, very weird. I've talked about this game a few times. The best way I can kind of describe it, I think, to a layman would be Virtua Fighter meets Fighting Vipers. Now, I've never played Fighting Vipers, but that's kind of what this is on paper. But in practice, it is so much more insane. See, you got Virtua Fighter versus Fighting Vipers, but also you can play as the Sonic the Fighters, you can play as the car from Daytona, USA, you can play as the mascot bear in the background of one of the stages, you can play as one of the Virtua cops, you can play as the Virtua Fighter kids, and the interesting thing is they all have their own unique mechanics. Like the Fighting Vipers guys have like the armor mechanics of Fighting Vipers, as well as like the Virtua Fighters have their own mechanics and stuff. They kind of feel like a watered-down variant of each of their individual games. Like, this is not a better Fighting Vipers than Fighting Vipers. It's not a better Virtua Fighter than Virtua Fighter, but it is in its own... I can't even talk. I'm so excited about this game. It is in its own class of how unique and interesting it is. It has Rent-A-Hero in it. Freaking Rent-A-Hero. You need this game in your life. This is by far one of the best fighting games I've ever played, and it is like one of the absolute most necessary like Sega Saturn games ever. I don't care if you don't like fighting games, get this for your Saturn, and get the Japanese version because it does have a Rent-A-Hero, which I believe was gutted from the North American version, which is a lot more expensive. Get an import card, but Fighters Mega Mix, you cannot go wrong with that. That is one of the best fighting games on the system. Alright, this one I got along with the Cube Battler games because it looked weird and I wanted to talk about it, but I just haven't had a chance to yet. We have Funky Head Boxers. And from what I can tell, this is just a boxing game, but everyone's got big cubes for faces. Like, let's just take a look at the back to try and get a clear understanding of what this game is. But yeah, it's basically just a boxing game, but the characters have big cube-shaped faces, and that's kind of it. I haven't actually talked about this game. I've actually never played it. I bought it to make a What the Hell Is video, and that's still not happened. But, you know, maybe someday Funky Head Boxers will get its time in the shine. I know it has a special edition version, which apparently has more stuff in it too, apparently. Alright, next we have, oh god, this game. I get a lot of shit for my review of this game, but I stand by what I said about that review, and I decided to do something really experimental with that review, and I still stand by what I did, and I'm still pretty proud of it, even though I get nothing but shit to this day. Like, I get negative comments all the time on it. This is Galaxy Fight. This is a Sega Saturn port of a Neo Geo game, and if you're going to get a Neo Geo port or any sort of arcade port for a console at the time, Sega Saturn's really the way to go because it could do basically arcade perfect stuff and it had memory expansions to do it versus the PlayStation. But Galaxy Fight is the most goddamn generically boring fighting game I've played on the Saturn. And this is on the Saturn, you know. You have Funky Head Boxers, of course, but you have Fighters Mega Mix, and you have the amazing Virtual On. You have, like, all the cool Darkstalkers games. Darkstalkers, Darksiders, I get those two confused all the time. My point is, when I played this game, I was so unimpressed by this. When I reviewed it, I decided I was going to use footage from every other fighting game to prove that this is definitively the most generically boring, not a goddamn thing fighting game ever. In fact, I think the most notable thing about this game is that there was like a cat girl in it, and that was kind of it. Like, it had one really nice looking stage with some like reflective water, but everything else about the game looked really muddy. All the characters were just really sort of boring, and they were trying to go for like a sci-fi slant to the game, but it just felt really underwhelming. The entire, like, it was a very difficult fighting game because of course it was a Neo Geo fighting game, but it was a Neo Geo fighting game that was boring. And that's on a console that has, I mean, I've already got like 3 better fighting games, and this is only like maybe a quarter of my collection. Quarter? It's about a quarter. Yeah, so I reviewed this and I decided, you know what? To review this game, I'm going to show every other alternative you could be playing that would be better time well spent. And, you know, I still catch a lot of shit for it, but I stand by it. Galaxy Fight is not a game I intend to play ever again, really, but it's something I've got. Okay. This is a game, I believe I reviewed this. This is Gen War. This was a game I think I saw very briefly on a demo disc I have for the Saturn, and it is a okay first-person shooter. It's got a bunch of really fun, silly FMV sequences. This is a domestic version, but it's in this pile, so I'll count it. And you just run around as a mech, first-person shooting aliens, swapping weapons and stuff. There's nothing too stand out about it from what I remember, but I do remember being kind of a fun, silly time if you could get it cheap. And I've got a full review of this you can go see, and then you can correct me on what I've gotten wrong from what I've said now, because I have no memory. But Gen War, I have fond memories of this game. I don't think it's great, but I have fond memories of it. Alright. So next we have Griffin. I remember this game mostly for just having a really bizarre control scheme. It's like a first-person sort of mech simulator, effectively. And Griffin was weird because you had to hold down one of the face buttons. I think it was like either A or C in order to move forward. And that to me just felt very, very weird, and I couldn't play it for more than a mission or two. It did get a direct sequel, which I believe was also on the Saturn. I don't have that. Then I believe there was one on the PS2, and I think even one on the original Xbox. This is... I don't really have any fond memories of this game, and I could not play it for very long. It was just... It just controlled very, very weird to me. Alright, so next we have... Oh god, this thing. So this is Hyper Riverthian, which is actually... a mistranslation. It should be Hyper Leviathan, but of course Japanese doesn't actually have an L sound, so they replace it with an R, hence why in Illusion of Gaia there's the Riverson, which should be Leviathan. This is a weird fighting game? sorta not. It's actually conceptually not dissimilar to Virtual On, but it's very, very awkward and weird. Basically, you play as a bunch of bugs and like sea creatures, hence Leviathan, fighting in like these very, very small, cramped environments, trying to kill each other. But it just does not control very well. It feels very sloppy. It feels very boring, and it feels almost more like a shooter. But none of the shooting mechanics feel all that solid. And it's by Technosoft, which really sucks because, I mean, we could have gotten another Thunder Force game. And to be fair, the Saturn did get compilations of Thunder Force, and it did get its own Thunder Force, but, you know, could have gotten another one instead of this. And you know what the biggest slap in the face is? This is a sequel. I don't have the original. I don't really aspire to have it, but I've seen it a few places. But yeah, Hyper-Reverthian. It's one of the weakest titles on the Saturn that I've played. Oh, this game. I reviewed this game forever ago, and since then, there's been a translation, but we have Linkle Liver Story, which, again, I think is a situation where, of course, Japanese doesn't really have an L sound, so they translate things to R, and R sometimes get translated to L. I think it's supposed to be Wrinkle River Story. This is a top-down sort of Zelda-style adventure game with some mild RPG mechanics. I reviewed this forever ago, and since then, like I said, it's got a translation. I actually really want to play that. Again, Satiator's kind of down. I just need to get a new Saturn with a new like port to connect it to, but either way, this is actually a pretty approachable game. I got stuck once early on, but you know, it was a situation where, and this is a great way to sort of test out any sort of import game, like import game 101. If you can't read the language and you get stuck, talk to everyone twice. Just standard RPG mentality right there. And you know, I got through it. And this is a really neat game where you just run around, you kill stuff, you solve some basic puzzles. It's a great game. Again, I've got a full review of this game. If you're going to import it, it's a little bit tricky to recommend based on the language, but it is heavily approachable all the same. And I would say this is one of the import games that surprised me the most, and one I would more readily recommend than others, certainly. Linkle Liver Story is a very special game to me, and I'm glad I reviewed it, and I hope you guys watched that video and you like this game, and you should check it out. And the translation, I would very much like to check it out myself someday. Oh, this is a game I did a full playthrough of a while back. This is Magical Hoppers. This is kind of a weird game, because you know how games in Japan get brought to North America around this time, and they had like all the anime-ness stripped from them? This is the inverse of that, because this is an American game that got turned into anime when they released it over there. So if you're familiar with the PlayStation library, you're actually probably familiar with this game already. This was a game called Pandemonium, which is a 2.5D platformer. It's a ton of fun, gets really ungodly difficult near the end, because I about a year ago played through it, and yeah, it gets real hard near the end. But the only difference between the two is they changed the characters. Whereas in the Japanese version, you play as like the blandest looking woman ever, and a creepy as hell clown, and a stick that looks like the creepy as hell clown. Now you have this girl, Guppy, who has a big floofy tail, and I love her. You play this guy, Clam, who's trying to be way too cool, and you got this little magic stick who incites stuff. What's interesting about Magical Hoppers is it wasn't just released on Saturn, of course, it was also released on PlayStation, like the original Pandemonium. But there's like a weird inverse of which version is the best. Like, if you want the original Pandemonium, you could get it on the Saturn, but the load times are significantly better on the PlayStation. Like, if you're getting original Pandemonium, get it on the PlayStation, absolutely. If you're getting Magical Hoppers, which is the same game but with more interesting characters, you absolutely want the Saturn version, because the PlayStation version, as I understand, has worse load times, and it has a gutted opening sequence that's like relegated to screenshots, whereas this has a fully anime opening. Which, if anything, makes it the definitive edition of Magical Hoppers. And I think I've mentioned this a few times, but many years ago I had this this magazine. It was one of the few gaming magazines I ever had, and I remember seeing this game in it, and I don't know what magazine it was, I don't know what the game is. I only remember that the magazine had a coupon for Pokemon Origami in it. But I remember seeing this one game and thinking, I want to play that game. And even to this day, I'm not sure I could ever really explain what I saw in those cuts or screenshots more than once or twice. Like I could pick out one or two details, but I couldn't tell you specific things about it really. So even identifying that game might actually be impossible, which is one of the biggest mysteries of my life, honestly, and that kind of sucks. But I remember seeing pictures of the original Pandemonium and thinking that might be the game. So I made an absolute, like, concerted effort to absolutely grab a copy of this because it's Pandemonium with more interesting characters. It was not the game I was thinking of, and that mystery still remains a mystery to me. But this game is very, very fun, and if you like Pandemonium, this is Pandemonium with a little bit more style, a little bit more drip. It's anime, and you know, it's on the Saturn, so it's good, obviously. That is Magical Hoppers. Alright, and our next game is another game I got as sort of an RPG to challenge myself to try and beat an RPG without knowing the language. Although this one was released in English, we have Magic Knight Rayarth, which is based on an anime and manga by Clamp. And they always do good stuff. This is a really approachable RPG. It's sort of a top-down action RPG with sort of some adventuring elements. Very, very easy to get into, very fun, even if you don't understand the language. I did manage to beat this game without any sort of guide or anything. But like I said, it was made available in North America. And what's really interesting is this was handled by Working Designs. Now, if you know Working Designs, you know that they like to add weird pop culture references that most people really dislike. They have weird rebalancing, which I'm not a big fan of, but they do like to treat their games with a lot of respect and reverence. Case in point, completely unrelated that I even have it here, but here's my Working Designs Lunar 2. It's that thick, it's got physical objects in it, it's got like props from the actual game world, it's got all sorts of standees and stuff, complete. When they make a game and they bring it to North America, they like to kick up the localization to 11 in spite of their, you know, difficulty rebalancing and translation stuff that a lot of people don't like, although I don't mind the translation stuff. And when they did that with Magic Knight Rayarth, they actually made 3 versions of it, because there's 3 different heroines to the story. Each one got a disc printing in their image. So technically, if you want to own like the total Magic Knight Rayarth, in spite of the fact every game is identical, you actually have to own 3, one for each character. I like her a lot myself, and I would like to get an English copy because I'm a big fan of Working Designs' work. But this game, it's actually pretty approachable even if you can't understand the language, because it does open up the world pretty naturally, I found. But yeah, that was made available in North America. It was based on an anime I have not seen. Really would like to, though. Alright, so this next little bit, this might shock you if you haven't noticed the background that my camera is more focused on than this stuff, thanks autofocus. But if you couldn't tell, I'm kind of a fan of Gundam, so is a complete set of every single Gundam game on the Saturn. Well, there's a technicality to that says this isn't complete, but it basically is. But we'll go at this one at a time. Starting with good old Mobile Suit Gundam. Creative name, I know. I've got gameplay of this on my channel, and I'd like to do a full playthrough at some point, but it's a pretty standard run and gun game. In fact, it's actually pretty slow and clumsy, and it's otherwise kind of unremarkable, but there's a really interesting sort of strategy game element to it. Basically every stage is just you running from left to right, shooting everything, and it has some pretty cool presentation moments and recreating scenes from the anime, which is great. But basically before you go into an area, you get to see the map ahead of you, and you can select different sections of it where you can get support, so you can actually plan out your route in advance to get support fire and stuff. It's a small feature that makes an otherwise rather clunky, rather unimpressive run and gun game, but you know, I thought it was really quite cool all the same. And yeah, it's not a bad game, it's just not a great game, and it's got the most generic ass name ever for a Gundam game. Following that up, we might as well start with Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. I've said this numerous times, but this is a very special series to me because, first of all, Zeta is like the best Gundam. It, like, just season-wise, it's absolutely that, or 8th MS Team. But also, in spite of the weird voice acting jank with returning characters in Zeta, it was dubbed in my hometown, so I kind of have to love it. And I've said this before, I would love to get my Gundam team picture from Zeta, signed by the actors at some point. That's a life goal of mine. This is actually basically a sequel to Mobile Suit Gundam. However, this game was released in 2 parts. So, here's part 2. The first part, you spent the entire game in the Mark II. This one you play as the titular Zeta. Finding both these games is actually really, really tricky because they're both online, just labeled as Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam for some reason. But this is the second half of it, where you can actually play as the Zeta, and as I remember, this is harder to find than the base one. But it's basically a sequel to like the original Mobile Suit Gundam, but with a Zeta flair, and that means that it's very, very grim and dark, and you know, it's just good. Zeta Gundam was really good, is the short version of this. Go watch Zeta, it was really damn good. Alright, let's follow that up with this, I guess. This is totally out of place, because it's actually from the latter half of my collection, but we have SD Gundam. This is SDG Sentry, which is basically a weird combination of a turn-based strategy RPG, or RPG, turn-based military strategy game, and like a one-on-one versus shooter sort of thing. Like they have both modes. Like ostensibly the adventure is a strategy game, but when you bring a Gundam into a fight with another Gundam, suddenly it turns into like a 2D side-scrolling shooting at your enemy type of game. I honestly don't care for this all that much, but I needed it for 2 reasons. First of all, I love the cover art. It's bombastic and very, very colorful, and it reminds me a little bit of the Dodonpachi cover art, which is some of my favorite cover art in general, plus on the Saturn, and I don't have that game and it makes me angry. But also, I like Gundam games and I wanted a full Gundam collection, so I got SG Gundam G Sentry. Following that up, we have not 1, not 2, but 3 games in 1. In Mobile Suit Gundam, the side story, Blue Destiny. This is 3 games in 1. I've reviewed every single one of these games. And, you know, this is a very, very cool little series of arcadey sort of first-person sort of mech simulator shooters. Basically, each game is a part of a trilogy, and this box set has all of them. In fact, it comes with a, as it says up there, 4th CD-ROM, which is an omake disc that has stuff like a sound test, which is particularly weird because there's no music in-game just for the cutscenes, because I think adding music would have made the game run slow. But they also have like a model viewer and like animation viewer and lots of fun little side bits, and you can only get that in this compilation set. Otherwise, you have to buy all 3 games individually, which is a little bit tricky to do. The first game, you start as a pilot of a ground gym running around shooting some stuff, and eventually in the second game you upgrade to the Blue Destiny, and you fight this guy, the E-Freak Custom, which is that guy right over there. Best Zeon suit ever. And then you upgrade to the Blue Destiny 3. And all throughout you are shooting, you are like invoking this super mode known as Exam. I was thinking of the rip-off one, Hades. But you have to take out all these sorts of enemies and protect objectives and do all sorts of stuff across all 3 games. The thing is, each game is a little different. The first game is pretty bland. You're playing as a generic grunt suit that doesn't really have anything special going on, and its missions are all fairly generic, aside from when you actually have to fight the Blue Destiny yourself and you're massively outgunned. The second game, I think, is not quite as interesting as the third game, but you do get to fight the Ifrit Custom at the end, and that is one of the coolest fights in Gundam, I think. At least in Gundam games. But then the third game, it's not quite as interesting, but it has such a huge variance of levels. Like, it's got offensive missions, it's got defensive missions. It has a mission where you're walking around like these really, really tight corridors, and it's almost sort of horror-y, and you're constantly checking your back not to get shot and stuff. It's really cool. I think this is probably the best set of Gundam games on the Saturn, honestly. And the only thing you lose by getting this collection is that I know the second game in its individual release came with a pin. I don't know about the rest of the games. I know the second game did, but no pin with this, but you get everything else. And you get an extra disc. And I think this is a must-have if you're a Gundam fan, because it's pretty much the best you're getting on the Saturn. Even if the games are a little bit wonky and janky. Okay, next we have something that's a little weird to talk about. So this is Mobile Suit Gundam Girin's Greed. Now what this basically is Nobunaga's ambition, but with Gundam. So, you know, you're a higher up in the Zeon forces and you get to make all these decisions like, what if Rambaral actually did get his DOMs, as opposed to Makube, that asshole, destroying them, or, you know, swiping them for himself and saying they were destroyed and getting good old Rambaral killed. And it turns out Rambaral defeats the white base and gets the Gundam. So, you know, you can totally change history and make sort of all these sort of important decisions. What if we made actual more Ifrits other than 8 instead of the DOMs? It turns out they're pretty awesome. There's lots of stuff. This is a cool sort of game for what if strategy fans, but it's hard to play without knowing the language. And I'm not the biggest strategy fan ever, but again, I wanted to collect them all, so, you know, I got this. But this is sort of where my collection is incomplete. Because while I do own this game, there was actually 2 separate printings of this game. And if you pop this open, you can see that there's a red decal right there on the disc. There's a separate printing where there's a purple one. So technically I do have everyone, but I don't have that purple variant that is otherwise identical. Also, this is a very bland looking disc otherwise. But yeah, if you wanted a strategy game where you wanted to control the events of history in Gundam that wasn't Gundam versus Zeta Gundam, and you don't mind, you know, the strategy angle, and you don't mind having to sort of brush up on your Japanese, so it's not bad. It's not bad, but here's also where some confusion comes in. Because as much as I think that's a neat game, even if it's not really my speed, there's also this game. Now, there's very little information, or at least there was when I bought this. Little information on this game. This also is just known as Mobile Suit Gundam Girin's Greed, as far as I could tell. And from what little information I could gather, it was like a limited edition, like, first printing of that game. And that's not actually what this is. In fact, this isn't really even a game itself. From what I remember, this is actually basically an expansion pack where you would plug it into your Sega Saturn, and you would go in and you'd select save data and information, you transfer to your Saturn, and then you get to play like extra campaigns and bonus stuff and see extra units and things in that game. It's been a while since I've seen it, but from what I remember, this is just an expansion disc and not like its own standalone thing. This is also a lot harder to find than the base game, so there's that. But that is my complete, as long as we don't count the purple decal, Gundam collection on the Saturn, and I'm a big fan of the fact that I have a complete Gundam collection on something. Alright, so our next game is one that I'm actually in the process of reviewing right now. We have Pup Breeder. This game actually does not feature dogs in any meaningful way or breeding. Instead, it features basically an RTS where you pick a girl and then a bunch of random animals, and you go fight random things like snowmen and trees that drop pollen and other weird nonsense. It's a very simple game. It's weird because I think the only connection to like the actual title of Breeder is the fact that you can sort of praise or scold at your animals if they don't follow your exact directions, because it is an RTS. And like, if you tell them off, they'll then follow your directions, but praising them doesn't seem to actually do anything. It's weird. But otherwise, it's a very, very nice, chill game if you can get it cheap. I looked up the price of this for my review, and it's like, there's one copy on eBay for about, you know, $15, and then there's 5 others after that that are like $200 for some weird reason. I don't know if that's just what's available to me or what, but for some reason there's like one version that's actually affordable and then like a million that are just absurd, and this game isn't all that good, but it's weird and it's interesting, so I got it. Plus the side is pink, and that's cool. Alright, next we have a game I've done a full playthrough of, and it's very, very difficult. This is Steam Gear Mash. I reviewed this game forever ago, and I think this is an absolute must-have for the system, even though it's very, very difficult. You play as this robot in an isometric platformer shooter hybrid thing that also turns into like a pre-rendered, like, sort of Zaxxon style shooter at times. And there's cats you can collect. And you're just running around shooting things, collecting new weapons and stuff. It's a neat little game. It is wildly unforgivable, or unforgiving, though. It's a very, very difficult game. And if you can't save to your Saturn or something, this is going to be a grim uphill battle for you to play. But I quite liked it. It's got a pretty solid soundtrack as well, and you know, if you're looking for a fun, great little game to start your collection or add to your collection, Steam Gear Mash I think is a must-have. And yeah, I think this is one that just perfectly encapsulates what you need in a Saturn game. Next we have another game that I think you have to have, and I think it's sort of one of those middle tier games. You know, they can't all be like those $100,000 Panzer Dragoon sagas. Sometimes you just need something fun that fills it out. Next we have Securitizing Columns. And Securitizing Columns is a game I've actually played all the way through. I've shown that off on my channel. This is basically a head-to-head versus game of columns with a really slick presentation. It looks quite beautiful. It's also really, really difficult, and I'm not just saying that because I'm bad at following block puzzle games, although that is true. It's tying with Sakura Wars, and they actually make meaning on that. You basically pick a girl of choice, and you have to go through a ladder fighting all the other characters, and as you earn points in the actual like battles, you'll fill up an energy bar, and every time you fill up that energy bar, you are then given a choice, not unlike the dialogue choices in actual Securitizing. And similar to that, you only have like 2 seconds to make a choice before it'll go away, and well, you're not going to get beat up by the girl because you didn't compliment her or anything, but you lose your opportunity to take action. And you can either choose to play defensively or play offensively. If you play defensively, your energy will reduce the number of like junk blocks on screen. If you play offensively, you shoot lasers at your enemy that drop a whole bunch on them. And you can store energy to do more and more damage and stuff. It's a genuinely great little columns game with a lot of depth as well as a lot of on-the-fly strategizing and quick thinking. I think that if you're collecting for the Saturn, this is a must-have. And the nice thing is it's not one of those like ridiculously high-quality, expensive experiences. It's, you know, it's not your Tempos or your like Tri-Rush Deppies or anything, but you know, it's not a super expensive game. And it's easy to pick up and play on like actual Sakura Wars, although that did get a translation. But yeah, Hanagumi Taisen Columns. It also got a sequel on the Saturn. Alright, next we have a game from Jet Wolf. Speaking of high quality, very expensive Saturn games, Bulk Slash. This is one of my most wanted Saturn games. It's certainly my most wanted import, and I have done a full playthrough of this. I've done a lot of stuff with this. This game's just great. Bulk Slash. Basically, you're a pilot of this mech. This mech can turn to a ship that can fire Macross style like homing missile barrages and stuff. And you can run around and find girls hanging out that'll be your like support units and whatever. And there's actually like relationship and dating sim sort of things in the sense that as you gather points and stuff, you increase your relationship with them and you get better unlocks over the course of the game, and you have to beat the game several times. Very, very cool game, very, very fun game. I would dare, and bear in mind that's with all this Gundam stuff, say this is probably the best mech game on the Saturn. It's a great, fun, arcadey good time, and unfortunately it's a very expensive game, but it's easily one of my favorites on the system. It's my most wanted import, and it's definitely probably the best import, I think. It's not my most wanted game, that's still Panzer Dragoon Saga, but yeah, the price point of that's going to make that impossible for me. Either way, Bulk Slash, great game, and I'm definitely thankful of Jet Wolf sending this to me, because this was one I would be very, very difficult for me to acquire on my own, and this one just means a lot to me, and it was an amazing game, and it was totally worth the wait. Less so is this other game I got from him that I traded for. This is Ninpen Manmaru. This is a game where you play as a penguin and platform around. It kind of reminds me of the 3D segments of Sonic 3D Blast, except it has like really, really awkward slow tank controls and some really unforgiving platforming segments. The sad thing is, if they cleaned up the controls and made it control a little less chunky, and they made the actual platforming, you know, better than just, here's a platform that's exactly the size of your character, land on it. You know, if they did more than that, you'd actually have a really solid game here. Unfortunately, it's pretty jank, and as nice as I think it looks, and as much as I want to like this game, I just don't like it that much. I found this game to be a disappointment, and wasn't worth the wait. But it still can be fun here and there. But Ninpen Manmaru, not quite as good as I'd hoped. Alright, next we have We have, I gotta read the side of this because I forget the name of this. This is Nanatsu Kaze no Shimamonogatari, I believe, which is something along the lines of Four Winds Village Adventure, if I remember correctly. And this is a game it even says it on the front in English, well done me, I had to look up the side of that. This is a game I've wanted to show off a whole bunch because it's a very cool game. It's kind of like a cross between a PC point-and-click adventure and a cinematic platformer. So think kind of like a fantasy version of Monkey Island meets like Another World, effectively. And if I remember correctly, like this game actually communicates entirely in pictographs, if I remember correctly, so it's actually pretty approachable if you can't read Japanese. And it's just one to keep an eye out for. I remember thinking this game looked really fancy, and I've always wanted to show this game off. It's been forever since I played it, so I might not be remembering it completely, but this is one of the coolest looking Saturn games I think I've ever seen, and I want to show it off someday. So, you know, maybe when I get my Saturn, well, replaced, I'll be able to do that better. But this is one I would heavily recommend if you like the whole PC point-and-click adventure stuff. But yeah. Our next game is really important to me. I think it would be safe to say it's top 3 Saturn games at least. I made a whole review about it, but I only rented it once when I was a kid. I mean, you could only get Saturn games for maybe 2 months, maybe 3, so I didn't have a lot of opportunities, but I remember renting it and loving it. I remember specifically the opening cutscene and the circumstances in which it happened. Like, you were this guy chasing this thing and you show up in like this mysterious like spaceship, and then suddenly like this giant monster comes down and gets you, and everything about the setup and the design of that world just from that opening cutscene. Even though I wasn't sure specifically what the game was, because it had a few sequels and I wasn't sure which one it was, that stuck with me so hard, and it became my absolute all-time favorite world in video games. And that game is Panzer Dragoon. Now, this kind of sucks because it is a North American Western release, and it was supposed to come in one of those big boxes that Saturn games tended to come in. Unfortunately, someone crammed this in a jewel case, and to do that, they hacked the manual in half to give it sort of a box art. And I'm a little upset about that because it is such an important game to me. If you're not familiar with Panzer Dragoon, first of all, you're a guy riding a dragon that's named after me, so it's automatically like the best game ever. But it's a rail shooter, and I've got a full review of this, you go take a look, but it's a very weird rail shooter where you're in a mysterious world where every creature is like half organic and half technological. And like I said, it's kind of my favorite world in games just because of the monster design, the world design. And it got several sequels. It got one that cost like $1,000 now, and I would kill to have it because it would be like the best game ever for me. But this game is very, very special to me, and it was basically the competition to Star Fox 64, and I honestly think this is a better game. It's got better music. It's a single experience as opposed to like multiple routes and stuff, but I still think this is way better, and it's still my favorite rail shooter of all time. Also, you get to pilot a dragon that's named after me, and that's pretty damn cool. I love Panzer Dragoon. Unfortunately, to add salt to the wounds, in addition to the fact that they hacked up the manual, like, you can even see that they hacked up the manual, seeing as it's like, it doesn't even finish the lines on the insides. Like, you know, intended for use on the Sega Saturn, and then there's going to be more, but of course it all got cut out, is the fact that on the side it says Panzer Dragoon /2 Zwei, and this had a sequel that was known as Panzer Dragoon Zwei, which is German for 2. It's one of the few bits of German I actually know. And if I understand, there was actually a compilation of the first and second games that was available in Japan. Unfortunately, we never got that in North America, so when they named this, they named it wrong on top of everything else. And it just looks like an absolute mess on my shelf. And it's honestly, the way this game was packaged, this specific one, and the way the previous owner took care of it is absolutely disrespectful to it. But I'm taking as good a care as I possibly can because this is one of the most special Saturn games to me. Other than, you know, the sequel I'll never be able to afford. But Panzer Dragoon, it's a very special game to me, and I like it a lot. So let's follow that up with Panzer Dragoon Zwei. This is the sequel to Panzer Dragoon, and it's basically a better game in every single way, but I'm not sure I like it more. This effectively acts as a predecessor to the first game, taking place well before the story of the original Panzer Dragoon, and it sort of shows the history of the dragon and where it comes from. And it's kind of neat because you play as this character who gets like this little like sort of like lizard camel thing that slowly morphs into the dragon as you go. And what's neat is like there's so many different forms of the dragon. It transforms as you play based on your experiences. You get points as you score higher in the game and take different routes and stuff because there's branching paths. And well, what sucks is in order to get the best dragon, you have to get all the points in the game. And in order to do that, you have to not only play flawlessly, but you have to make specific choices. And the thing that really bugs me about that is I think some of the best set pieces in this game are on paths that don't give you enough points. Like, there's this one fantastic area where you're stuck like underground in this one area and you're just standing on this platform as it slowly rises and like monsters start showing up all around you. And like that's on a suboptimal path, and that is probably like the most memorable bit of this game. But there's a lot of really cool things in here. It has a really cool extra feature mode known as Pandora's Box, which was available in the first game, but it was very, very lacking. In this game, you can play as like any form of the dragon by selecting it there, start on any level. You can even play as dragons that aren't available in game, such as the villain dragon from the first game, which wasn't even playable in that game. You can play as the villain. It's not quite a dragon, but the villain monster in this game as well as an unlockable. There's so many unlockables in this game. But I think while this game is objectively better than the original Panzer Dragoon, I still like the original better. It's a Banjo-Kazooie versus Banjo-Tooie sort of situation where in making it more complex and objectively like a better game, you take away the simplicity, and by taking away the simplicity, you take away what sort of makes it an instant classic in my eyes. But Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei is very, 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 very good. And allegedly it's going to get a remake. The first game did. I talked about it on my poop game of the year list because it's not very good. But, you know, it's a sequel that I think is really quite good. And I still prefer the original, but I really like this game. I've got to review this sometime soon as well. Because Panzer Dragoon Zwei is really quite a special little game. Next, we're following it up with another game I've reviewed and showed off numerous times. We have RoboPits. RoboPit's a really cool game. It is a first-person fighting game using a customizable robot. Basically, you pick a robot out of like individual bits that are like just general shapes and like a goofy face, and then you equip weapons on it, and then you fight other robots, and you steal their weapons to make your robot better. And it's not a complex game, it's not a deep game in terms of story, because there is really no story. It's just you fight after fight climbing the ladder until you get all the cool parts and stuff and become number one. But it's a really, really incredibly fun time. It has a great soundtrack. It's a lot of fun, but I will say it's very unforgiving. And the moment the game wins like one round, it's very easy to just lose all momentum and basically have to start over, because this game can strip you of all your parts and leave you to have to start over, and that sucks. It also got a sequel that is exclusive to the PlayStation, and that's a weird game because whereas this one has sort of a goofy cartoony look, they went for more of a edgier sort of Gundam-y, like hardcore anime look. I kind of like that a little bit better in terms of visuals, but I will say that this has a lot of charm. And the sequel, for whatever reason, when it was brought to North America, they gutted all the music. I've also reviewed it, so you can go take a look at that. But RoboPit, if you can get it cheap, is a really neat, interesting, fun first-person fighting game. And fighting games in first person are always interesting. And it's still a better fighting game than Galaxy Fight, as they all are. Alright, following this up is a game I reviewed probably almost a decade ago now. We have Robotica. This was a game I rented once well back in the day, and I didn't even know what the name of this game was. I just remembered it, and remembered it really, really not favorably. It's not a good game. It's a first-person shooter where you play as a little motorcycle robot getting injected into a space station where you can only see about 5 feet in front of you in like the best conditions, because sometimes the lights are off and you can't see anything. You just have to bump around into walls until you find a light switch. It's 30 levels of that. It is pain. I don't think I've ever actually finished this game because it's awful. Like, there's a reason why my review is part of a series called Robot Games That Ruined My Childhood. This game is awful. I don't recommend it to anyone. Someday I'm absolutely gonna have to play it again and try and actually play through it. I don't look forward to that day. So next we have another great fighting game on here and a Japanese import. We have Samurai Showdown 4 Amakusa's Revenge. This is, again, it's an SNK Neo Geo fighter on the Saturn. It requires the memory expansion, and it is just a very, very fun time. This is one of my favorite fighting games on the system. Like, I tend to not like the SNK fighting games because they're wildly unfair, and this isn't necessarily all that different, but there is just so many characters, there's so many paths. There's multiple story paths because it's based on a timer and stuff. There's several different bosses to fight. It's a really good time, and it's a very mechanically complex fighting game, and I absolutely freaking love it. Also, my battery is dying, so hopefully we get through this without any weird cuts. Alright, our next game, de jour. I'm just curious about something real quick. Yeah, okay. We have, and now I can't close it, Sakura Taisen, which has a fun little fold-out poster inside. This is Sakura Wars, the original. We never got it in North America, although this was unofficially translated in English, which is very, very cool. It is a combination dating sim and turn-based RPG strategy game. It's a very cool series if you're into that sort of thing, but it is very dialogue heavy. Now, fortunately, there's a translation. Unfortunately, I don't have my Satiator to play it, so I'm stuck sort of bumbling around Japanese, but I have played several levels in this game, and it's a lot of fun. The problem is that, you know, you have to make decisions to make girls like you more so they fight better in combat, and when you can't read the dialogue and you're supposed to do it on like a 10-second timer, is a little bit hard, but I would say this is a fun Saturn game that you gotta get. I quite like Sakura Wars a lot, and I would love to get more games in the series, which is why we're following that up with the special limited edition of Sakura Wars 2. This pink box reminds me a lot of another pink box I bought because I thought it was the same thing, which is also something I've got on hand, which is Grandal on the PlayStation, which is a great little platformer. This is basically just a sequel to Sakura Wars. I don't think there's really much more I can say about it. If you've seen Sakura Wars, you've seen Sakura Wars, and this is like the limited edition that comes with a big fancy box. I think the original actually came with like a clock and stuff, and it's like full super big edition, but there were some really cool limited editions of Sakura Wars. And this is more of Sakura Wars, and it comes in a really stylish pink box that just looks good on a shelf, especially with Grandal as well. And I do like Sakura Wars. Alright, next we have the game I mentioned at the start when I said, you know, my collection would have been like triple expensive plus the value of my Saturn plus the translation card if I bought a domestic release. That game is Saturn Bomberman. And Saturn Bomberman is a game I've shown off a few times. First of all, it's Bomberman, you need to have it. But second of all, it's Bomberman with up to 10-player multiplayer on a single disc on a console. I need you to understand how cool that is. But secondly, it is a Bomberman game that has probably some of the best visuals I've ever seen. Like, everything is just really nice and bright and colorful. All the graphics are really nice, crisp sprites. It's just beautiful. There's voice acting, the stages are beautifully designed. Every level has like a cool remix of the Bomberman theme that plays to the theme of the level. I think this is one of the coolest Bomberman games of all time. And even though I'm not really into the arcadey Bomberman games so much, I think this one is an absolute must-have. Well, first of all, if you're importing, absolutely. This game cost me 50 cents, as opposed to like the 300 an English copy cost at the time. This game gets real expensive if you order it domestically, and the only thing you lose out on is the English dub of everything, and to be fair, it's just saying start at the end of every mission, so or at the start of every mission, so you know you're not missing much ultimately. And I just think it is quite a cool game, and I think Saturn Bomberman is absolutely must have. Also, there were a lot of Bomberman games on the Saturn, but this was the one that took the cake. So our next game du jour is going to be another really cool import. we have Shadow of the Tusk. And Shadows of the Tusk is a, first of all, it has amazing box art, but second of all, it is a pretty much entirely in English import. It's a turn-based strategy game, if I remember correctly. Although I remember someone telling me, I think it might have been Vermilion on the Discord, they had a copy of this that came with like a full deck of playing cards, so it actually had like its own built-in physical card game that came with original releases, and that is just really cool. But this game is like just a must-have if you're importing, because it is just so easy to play, because basically everything's in English already, and you know, that's great. Yeah, so Shadows of the Tusk, if you're into strategy games, you're into RPGs, and you want to play an easy-to-play import, grab it. It is getting up there in price. I noticed this was climbing in price, but I think that if you are interested, this is definitely one to look out for. For sure. For sure. Shadows of the Tusk. Just counting this, let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, on to the next pile. So next we have Super Puzzle Fighter 2. Now, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 is an amazing little puzzle game. It's kind of like a columns or like a match 3 thing where you got all these gems and you have to connect them to make bigger gems, and then you have to get like a bomb to connect them to blow them all up, all while having Darkstalkers and Street Fighter characters beating each other up in the background as you play. I love this game in spite of the fact I hate fighting or falling block puzzle games, except instead this is Sega Rally. I bought this from a figure seller on eBay, and they said this is what it was, and when I looked inside, it wasn't, and I was kind of sad. And Sega Rally's fine, but I would have preferred this game. It's actually a game I really love on the Game Boy Advance, so getting a copy of this on the Saturn would have been great. But alas, I just have the game, and I think it has like the foldable card inside that makes it more collectible somehow and stuff. I don't understand why that works, but unfortunately it's Sega Rally, which I care less for. But Super Puzzle Fighter 2 or EX or whatever, if you're looking for puzzle games, grab it because it's a good one. I wish I had a copy. Next we're going with all the way back to the past to when I first got my Saturn. We have the bootleg sampler disc, and I've actually shown this disc off before a couple times. This is it's a demo disc that contains a level from Clockwork Knight 2, as well as, I believe, Sega Rally, and I think one other game. I think it might have been like Virtua Cop or something like that. But it also contained a whole slew of videos and stuff of cool Saturn releases, and it made me want to try so many of them. And now that I have a Satiator, when I get a Saturn that actually works with it, I will be able to, and that's great. But I played so much of this, even though it was only like half a demo, or half a level of a demo, because I was just so engrossed with Clockwork Knight 2. It was such a fun time for me, even though it was only half a level in there. And this bootleg sampler, I love it so much. My disc is like really ratty and scarred, but man, I have so many fond memories of this. There was apparently a sequel too, which was apparently like Halloween themed. I've never actually seen it though. I think it's called like Bootleg Sampler Hits the Road, and it's like Halloween themed or something, but it's interesting. Alright, this is kind of topical because more recently there's like a modern version of this that's nowhere near as good. We have Sonic Jam. And what Sonic Jam is it's a Sonic compilation, but, and I know that doesn't sound that interesting, this is the definitive Sonic compilation. First of all, when Sonic Jam first launched, it came with a selection of literal jams you could spread on toast. It had like Sonic Grape, Knuckles Strawberry, and I think like Tails Marmalade or something like that. Okay, the fact that these games came with actual physical jam makes it the best version of Sonic. But seriously, this is a compilation of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, as well as every permutation of Sonic and Knuckles combined with them, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And they weren't just ports because they were built entirely from the ground up, including the soundtrack. The soundtrack was actually completely redone for it. So there was a lot of really interesting permutations and weird things you could do in it, such as being able to use the spin dash in the very first Sonic the Hedgehog. And that blew my goddamn mind when I was a kid. That was the coolest thing ever, and nowadays, trying it, I mean, it's useless. Using the spin dash in original Sonic doesn't really work because none of the stages were built with it, but the fact that it was there was very, very cool. And what this game also featured was Sonic World. And Sonic World was like this huge 3D stage where you could run around, and it was basically just an extra menu that you had to physically run around, so it took a lot longer to do anything. But you could go to like a building that showed you videos, like the advertisement for the Japanese Sonic movie and like the cutscenes from Sonic CD and all that. You could go and like go take a look at Sonic production art and like promo art, listen to music on the sound test and stuff like that. But it also had a game to it, because not only was it an environment you could run and jump around in, you could jump on this little trampoline and it would give you little challenges, and if you completed all the challenges, you'd unlock a giant ring you could jump into, which just ejected you from the level a different way, but it was interesting. And I've actually shown all of that off before on this channel. You should go take a look at that, because I just love this compilation. But I remember as a kid seeing like the edge of a snow level in that 3D world, and I swear I saw someone get there once, like in a screenshot or something in a magazine. It might have been like a troll thing, but I swear someone told me how to do it once, and I've never been able to do it. And I've always been curious about that like weird extra snowy bit in Sonic World. I think it's probably just a little bit of filigree off to the side to sort of hint that it's a bigger world or something, but it's a very small 3D level in a very cool compilation, and this is the best Sonic compilation that will ever exist. Period. Forever. Still better than Sonic Origins, and they didn't have to sell this with a million different versions and have an Excel spreadsheet to explain what you get. You just got Sonic Jam and some Sonic Jam, and that was pretty good. I quite like Sonic Jam, and I don't appear to have some side information on it, but I do have it there for some reason. Alright, Sonic Jam. If you want a Sonic game, that's the one to get. Following that up is a game I quite like. This is Starfighter 3000. Now, as I understand, this is like a Saturn port of what I think is like a 3DO game, but that 3DO game was like one of those sort of games that was not quite like a DVD where you just moved a cursor that was shaped like a ship, but it wasn't far off. As I understand, I've never played it. But I did a review of this, and it was a really cool, fully 3D flying game. Like, it wasn't a great game, and it looked really rough around the edges, but man, I just remember thinking Starfighter 3000 was actually quite a lot of fun. And if you could get it cheap like I did, it's fantastic. It had great environmental destruction too. Like, you'd shoot the ground and suddenly like fire would spread out, or it would look like destruction spread out, so you were actively like shaping the terrain and stuff. And on the Saturn, that's pretty impressive. I really like Starfighter 3000 basically, and if you can get it for cheap, you should, cause it's good. Following that up, we have, I did a gameplay video of this at one point, this is Tama, Adventurous Ball in Giddy Labyrinth. This is a game, if you can't tell, I bought entirely for the title, because Tama, Adventurous Ball in Giddy Labyrinth is definitely a title of some description. I bought this because I thought it was a weird title, and I thought it might be fun to do a what the hell is video on it, and I eventually did it. It's, the best way I can describe it is like if you ever went to a party as like a children's party as a kid, and like they had a piñata filled with all sorts of like dollar store toys, and you could get like one of those little like mazes with a little ball in it that you had to shake to sort of get through the maze. It's basically that, but a game. And it costs a little bit more than a crappy little dollar store puzzle toy thingy. I don't think it's all that fun. I think the physics are really annoying, and some of the level design's rather obnoxious, and it froze on me at one point. And I'm not sure that's because of my disc. I think that might have just been because the game's not programmed very well. But it's, you know, it's kind of interesting if you can get it kind of cheap. I mean, you can at least say you own Tama, Adventurous Ball in Giddy Labyrinth, and that's not nothing. Unfortunately, the side only says Tama, which is, you know, how half-assed is that? Come on, use the full name. Following that up, we have a game that's absolutely cursed. We have Tetris Plus. Now, if you know me, you know that I've probably tried to buy Tetris about 80 different times, and with the exception of my Game Boy Tetris and now this, every version of it's been broken. Tetris Plus is kind of an interesting game though, because it's got a standard Tetris mode like you'd expect, but then it has a second mode that's sort of like a inverse of Super Gussen no Yo-Yo, if you're familiar with your Japanese obscure puzzle titles, also known as like Yo-Yo's Great Adventure or something like that. Basically, you play this little explorer guy who's trying to get to like a door at the bottom of the stage, and as he walks around, you have to like try and break blocks by building Tetrises and stuff. And the longer you take, the ceiling slowly comes down to crush him, so you need to actually like puzzle him out of danger. And that's pretty cool, I think. I think that's pretty cool, you know? Tetris Plus. If you need Tetris, it's Tetris. Alright, the next game I cannot remember the proper full name for, but it is, I believe, Story of Thor. This is the sequel to Beyond Oasis. And Beyond Oasis was a really cool top-down adventure RPG on the Genesis that I played on numerous compilations, and I think I've started about 100 times. And every time I started, I remember thinking, I love this game, I need to play more of it, and promptly forget to do it. So I bought this hoping it would let me, you know, play more Beyond Oasis, even though it's the sequel, it would be slightly different. But I've never really had a chance to play it. And again, you know, once I get my Satiator up and running, I'll be able to do it in English, which would be nice. But yeah, Beyond Oasis, it got a sequel on the Saturn. I'm pretty sure it was exclusive, and here it is. The English version is ridiculously expensive though. But it is Thor Sere Hokiden, whatever that actually means. Following that up, we have Battle Arena Toshinden Ura. I'm actually not familiar too much with the Toshinden games. I know that there was one on the Wii, which I kind of want to try just because I always associated the Toshinden games with the PS1, so thinking that one came out so late is just kind of weird. But I'm pretty sure Ura is basically like a redefining of the original, named after the Ultra Revenge Attack, which is like a modified gameplay style of the original, as I understand. It's not like a sequel or anything. At least as I understand. Like I said, I'm not exactly super well versed on Toshinden, but I bought this because I thought it would be a fun way to try the series out and get into it, and I found myself kind of levitating to the lady with the whip because I tend to like the faster characters, so I usually end up playing as the girls. I don't think it's a great 3D fighter by any means, but it was like 50 cents, and you know, it was something to add to my collection. And I do think that this actually did get a release in English. But, you know, Toshinden, if you're into Toshinden, there's some more. Okay, this game is... I hate this game, but there's something so cool about it. So this is Valholian. And Valholian is a top-down, turn-based strategy RPG, not unlike, say, I was going to say Valkyria Chronicles, but Fire Emblem, or, you know, more important to me, Shining Force. This game is really cool. It has probably the most powerful and greatest use of the Saturn's 3D ever. Like, it looks honestly a bit like a Dreamcast game. This game looks kind of amazing for a Saturn game. Like, it should not be running on the Saturn. Unfortunately, it is designed by people who don't know how to design games very well, so while it looks great, every stage is basically save and reload every turn if you don't want to screw this up, because it is wildly unforgiving, and the stages are huge and they take forever. Ironically, this is one of the few Saturn games that actually does have an English translation, though, which is kind of a weird choice, because this is not the best game ever. Can we get a screen of some of the images on the back? Yes, can we focus on that? Autofocus, please. Let's do some of that thing that you're named after. There we go. Yeah, we can kind of see some characters on there, and that does look vaguely Dreamcast-esque. This is, in all honesty, probably the nicest looking 3D Saturn game you will find. Possibly the nicest looking Saturn game, but there's some really nice 2D Saturn games. In fact, Saturn looked best in 2D, I think, but this does look right up there Dreamcast levels, and it's impressive on a technical standpoint. From a gameplay perspective, Valholian is not fun to play in any real capacity, though. Alright, so following that up, we go with a really, really good Saturn game, and this is one of those 2D games that just looks gorgeous. We have Vampire Survivor. Vampire Survivor, Vampire Savior. I've played way too much Vampire Survivor. You can tell. Go play Vampire Survivor. It's like $2 on Steam, and it's one of the best games on there. Vampire Savior is Darkstalkers 3. Now, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. If you want arcade games on like the PS1 or the Saturn, get it on the Saturn, because they're basically arcade perfect, It's versus fighting. It has way more animation than Darkstalkers 3 actually had on the PS1. It is gorgeous. This is actually one of my favorite fighting games on the system. It holds its value pretty well too, but it is fantastic. And you get to play as a Bumblebee lady, who is absolutely my go-to character, but you get to play as all these wacky, crazy characters. You can fight on the side of buildings and in swamps and like in this weird, like, fancy vampire party that's one of my favorite stages of all time. Like, I just love this game. I love the characters. It's very difficult and I'm not good at it, but this is a great game and it's one of my favorite fighting games of all time. Vampire Savior, like Vampire Survivor, is a thing you absolutely need to play in any capacity you possibly can. Unfortunately, Darkstalkers is kind of dead as a series, but I have this and I have my huge, like, every game compilation on the PS2, which is kind of nice, so, you know, but, Vampire Savior. If you like fighting games, if you like imports, if you love your Sega Saturn, you owe it to yourself to get this, because it's that damn good. I'm so excited about this, I'm shaking right now. Also, I'm just in general very emotional about the Saturn because I love it. Alright, next we have Vatlava. This is a weird game. I've reviewed this before. This is like a weird sort of isometric... It's sort of like Combat on the Atari 2600, where you get to take two tanks and try and kill each other in an isometric way. This is a game I learned well after something, but this is actually a game that got a sequel. This no-name game no one's ever heard of got a sequel on the GBA, or rather a prequel, called Car Battler Joe. And I reviewed that game forever ago, and I saw this, and the main character from that game is this guy, who's like the main character in this game. And it's basically just versus top-down tanks like Combat, but on the Saturn, so it looks good. The music is okay, and the characters are interesting, but I just think this is one of those games you should add to your collection just because it's a good way to fill it out, and it's not a bad game. I don't think it's great, but if anything else, it's just weird that Car Battler Joe, this obscure, awesome GBA game everyone needs to own, was apparently a sequel to an arguably more obscure Saturn game, and I love both with a passion. But now I gotta play some Car Battler Joe. But Vatlava, not to be confused with Baklava. It's not quite as tasty, but it's not bad. Following that up by, oh god, I hate this thing. This is Virtual Highlight. This is a game I really should talk about at some point, considering that the first review I ever put out mentions Highlight, and I still haven't made a video on Highlight. Virtual Highlight is this weird thing where they decided to remake the original Highlight, but put it in a third-person camera perspective with digitized actors over top of it. So you've got this realistic photo of a guy running around wearing this really garish, ugly armor that's poorly, like, modeled over top of his photo. It just looks so bad. There's really jank FMV cutscenes as well, if I remember correctly. But it's basically the original Highlight, which is not good in any real capacity. Also, it has, like, infinite gameplay if you like Highlight, because it uses like a random number generation seed to basically configure where all the stuff is, and sometimes items are cursed and sometimes they're not. It's interesting. Terrible game, but there's at least effort here, and you can kind of make fun of it for how dumb it is. And that's not nothing. Also, I believe this game was made by Atlas, so that's something, I guess, but Virtual Highlight. It did come out in North America, too, for whatever reason. Alright, next we have my last import, and this is something I feel really bad about. See, when I started collecting this, and even when I started this channel, I don't really watch YouTube videos anymore just because I intentionally want to remove myself from anyone else's opinions and stuff. I don't script anything, but I don't want to like subconsciously steal someone else's observations or jokes or anything, so I just don't watch anything anymore. But when I started, what I would do to find some of this stuff would be to look at old, like, 100 games in 10-minute compilations, and I remember seeing this game specifically in it, and I feel cheated by the video I saw it in. This game is Virus. Now, if I recall, this is actually a tie-in with a manga and anime. And when I saw this on that 100 Games in 10 Minutes compilation, it looked like a first-person dungeon crawling adventure, but it like had some like cyberpunk elements to it. And that is in here, but it's like 2% of the game. This is basically a visual novel. It's a visual novel in a language I don't understand, and what's worse, it's possibly the worst designed style of visual novel because you can't advance no matter what you do unless you go through every text option on every item in triplicate, and you have to make sure you do it in a specific order. So you have to look at everything in every room 3 times. And remember how I said there was like first-person cyberpunk dungeon crawling? It's in here, but like the first bit of it is only like 2 minutes long, and that's after about an hour and a half of just clicking through text. And save points are on a chapter-by-chapter basis, and every chapter is like 2 or 3 hours long, so if you screw up the dungeon crawling, you lose a lot of time, and you end up just having this terrible, terrible experience. If this was in English, I'd still probably hate it because I don't particularly care for visual novels. But I felt cheated by this game. And it looked cool too. But yeah, Virus. Virus is a great example of a kind of game you can't really import because it's not even a hybrid adventure, it's just a visual novel and it's a bad one. But again, you gotta roll the dice with some of these imports to see what you get. But now we have my English releases. I don't have many of them, but I do have a few. When I first got my Saturn many moons ago for my birthday, I think I was like 5 or something like that, it came with that demo disc I showed you, and then it came with 3 games. The first game was Virtua Cop. And you can't see this because it's on my display, but my camera's autofocusing on Rage's face over here. And I'm surprised I remember his name is Rage and his name is Smarty. But either way, Virtua Cop is a light gun game where you shoot stuff a whole bunch, but I didn't have a light gun, I had a controller, and I could not figure out how to reload for, and I'm not joking, years. So I think I got past like the first 2 guys that shot at me in the first level, and then just stopped there and was sad. It got a sequel though, apparently, and you know, the character from the sequel was in Fighter's Megamix, so there's something to be said about Virtua Cop, but I do not particularly care for Virtua Cop, but it is a part of my childhood. Following that up, we have what is considered to be a pretty good fighting game, Virtua Fighter 2. Now, Virtua Fighter 2 has a special place in my heart, because I do think it is a good fighting game, but as I've said numerous times, and it's not for resale, so I couldn't sell it if I tried, I'm bad at fighting games. I can't do inputs with my terrible motor control, so it's hard. But I remember that when I played this in like 1996, this was the point where I swore off fighting games ever again, because, you know, whenever I played fighting games against the computer or any other opponent, they'd like have fatalities or fireballs or special moves, and I'd have like punch and kick, and if I was lucky, jump. And this was the last fighting game I played until like 2012 when I picked up Blaze Blue Continuum Shift, which had the beginner mode where you could hold down buttons to do special moves. It turns out accessibility in fighting games makes it more fun, because when everyone can do special moves, you know, you feel good even if you're bad at it. Unfortunately, like, even in that game they kind of stripped that ability if you want to play online or against anyone, but I digress. Make your games have accessibility for people who aren't very good or who physically can't do this stuff, please. But this is a good game. I like playing as Sarah. Although when I was younger, I really gravitated to Pai-chan. She was kind of my girl. But since then, I've kind of evolved into Sarah. And since then, I've watched the Virtua Fighter anime. And you should do it because it is incredibly bad and just like laughably fun. But this was a good sequel to Virtua Fighter 1. Virtua Fighter 1 is just so not good. In fact, the original Saturn release, which I actually don't own, was so bad and so rushed, they had to re-release it and give it away for free to people who own the original copy as an apology for how bad it was ported. Although the original wasn't all that great to begin with. But Virtua Fighter 2, it's classic, it's way too hard, and I'm not very good at it, but I still have a very fond place in my heart. The last game in the set of 3 I started with is the one I played way too much, and it's Daytona! Insert good old Mitsuyoshi music here. Seriously, you should watch the recording of the composer of this who sang all the lyrics. He is having an absolute blast, and then you need to go see his digital self recreated in Phantasy Star Online too, because he's having a blast there too, and it's awesome. But Daytona USA, I've said this before, I'll say it again. This game is pretty much the definitive arcade experience, you know? The first thing you do whenever you go into an arcade, which, you know, will be a while now, you know, you gotta play Daytona USA, and then it's gotta be the last game you play. And then you play nothing but Outrun in between those 2 points because that's the best arcade game ever. But this is a classic game. It is not the best made on the Saturn. Stuff pops in left, right, and center. Everything's way too chunky, and it doesn't run super great. That's why they had to like make an update version. But this game I have played so much. Out of the 3 games that my Saturn came with, this is the one I played more than anything because it was the only one I was actually kind of good at, even though I hate racing games. I really don't like racing games, especially track-based ones. If it's an open road where you get to pick where you go, I love it. That's why I love Outrun. But this game was very special to me. I spent way too many hours playing it, and yeah, you should grab it. It's a must-have for the system. In fact, I would say it's iconic for the system. Alright, next we get to see the really cool Saturn long boxes. I friggin' love these. This is actually why I want to collect all the long boxes for PS1 games as well. First we have Solar Eclipse. This was a game by Crystal Dynamics, and it was sort of one of those like sort of FMV games where you kind of control a ship, but it's basically a cursor on screen and stuff. I remember this game on the back. It makes a special point of pointing out that it stars Claudia Christian, who I did not know who that was. Apparently that was a big deal. It turns out she plays the huntress lady from Skyrim, who I always marry, and who she, despite being a huntress, complains that my house has animals around it. Figure that out. But Solar Eclipse is a weird space sort of FMV game. I don't think it's great, but it's kind of a fun, goofy time. I remember when I recorded a gameplay footage thing for my channel on this, I found like this weird like little hole in the side of a wall in like this tunnel, and I flew through, and I think I unlocked like this weird bonus level where I was flying through a cave, and like your like partner's portrait would show up on screen, and it was like an outtake image of her just sticking her tongue out or whatever. It was a very weird thing. I have no idea what that was, but it made me laugh, and it was memorable. I don't think this is a great game, but if you can get it cheap, Solar Eclipse isn't bad. It's just not a game I particularly like, you know? Like, it's a fun game, it's a cool thing, and it's a fun memory for me, but, you know, it was just something I bought for my channel because it was cheap, really. As I knock all this stuff over and feel bad about it. Alright, next we have my last long box, and this game is very, very personally important to me. So, when I was a kid, at one point, my dad, who worked out of town, he decided to take me and my mom out of town to like a business meeting or something like that. All I remember is we went to a hotel. And before we went, I was allowed to go to the local video store, and I got to pick a game. Now my dad's super impatient, and the thing you have to understand about me is I'm really bad at making decisions. Like, I am indecisive AF. So I've got like this small shelf of games, and I have to pick one. Like, which one game am I going to pick that's going to define my weekend? And if I pick the wrong one, I might as well have picked nothing, you know? I had to make a decision, but, you know, I don't want to make the wrong decision. Like, if you want to view into my brain, I'm the kind of person who will ignore eating because I don't want to eat something I don't necessarily want, only to find out what I want later and then just not be hungry. You know, I gotta make the right choice in the right situation, and it drives me crazy. But my dad was super impatient, so he's honking the horn, honking the horn. The kid who worked behind the till, he walks up to me and is about to put this brand new game that he just got in on the shelf. And I asked him to let me take a look at it. And I thought that the cover art looked kind of cool, and my dad's honking the horn, so I don't have a chance to really make a decision. I'm just like, okay, I'll take this. Now bear in mind, this disc never touched their shelf. So I took it and I played it at that hotel, and that's really the only thing I remember. That, and I was eating marshmallow strawberries, which is why that's the definitive snack of this game. But I loved it so much, I went back to that video store and I re-rented it, and I re-rented it, and I re-rented it, and I re-rented it so many times that the owner of the store actually came up and approached me and just said, "Kid, look, you've done nothing but re-rent this. This game has never actually touched our shelves and been like an official piece of stock available to anyone else. Re-rent it one more time and you can keep it." So I did. Unfortunately, my original copy got, you know, taken to the pawn shop and given away for free. And I had to hunt down this copy, and it was way too expensive, but it's very personally important to me. In fact, I showed this off as a Let's Play on the first birthday I did for my channel, and that game is Astal. Now, Astal is really not the most fantastic game ever. It is a fairly basic 2D platformer. You run, you jump, and your ultimate goal is to save a girl. But you have such a wide variety of abilities. Like, your character's effectively Superman, except not flying, so he's actual Superman, because Superman could never actually fly. That's why he jumps real high. That's the whole thing about leaping taller than, you know, a building or whatever. But your character, he can create whirlwinds with his breath, he can create earthquakes with his fists, he can lift things and throw them into the background. But the thing that really stuck out about this game, aside from the fact that it's awesome, is everything was just beautiful. It was a 2D hand-drawn world where everything was made of crystal. And you could see that in the design of everything. And this game just stuck out so specially to me because it was just so interesting. Apparently even Japanese copies are costing a lot nowadays, so this game's actually really, really desirable. And the funny thing is, at its core, it's a pretty unremarkable 2D platformer, but it's beautiful and executed really well done. The funny thing is, and I can't even show you this necessarily, is if you want to find an English copy on a shelf, you'll have trouble doing it because the side of the thing is actually completely blank. And when I bought this, someone actually had to go and create a logo on the side of it because the part where the logo is supposed to be is actually blank. And if you notice, they actually like traced all this stuff on the thing. So this is probably worth less than a standard copy, but you know what? It makes my copy extra special and extra meaningful to me. And like I said, I'm shaking. I'm so emotional and so excited about this game. This is easily one of my favorite games of all time, even though at its core it is basically an unremarkable platformer. I just love this game. This is one of the most important games in my life. And there's only one other game I could follow that up with, and that is possibly the most important game of my life. Now, I'm about to bring the tone down a whole bunch, and I apologize for that, but I've never shied away from being honest about my life and stuff, so I apologize. The tone's gonna get a little bit sad here for a sec, but when I was a kid, you know, I now have a word for it. I'm on the spectrum, but I was always sort of singled out everywhere as just being nebulously weird. I never had friends. I got beat up a lot. I got sent to many babysitters where I was not treated terribly well, and the truth is, my home life was not much better. And I guess to make a long story short, the best way I could put this is I never really felt a lot of, I guess what you'd say, childlike wonderments. You know, I never felt like everything was super amazing, and I never felt like magic in the world around me, so to speak. And when I had this Saturn, I went up to my local specialty rentals shop, which I only ever got to go to 2 or 3 times a year. It's not even around anymore. And I found this one game, and it looked so special to me that I had to play it. So I took it, and I plopped it in my Saturn, and it gave me an experience unlike any other. It was, the most pure way I can say it is, it was like experiencing magic for me. And I've only ever experienced that one other time in my life. It was also when I was very, very young. I went to the zoo with my grandpa, and he held me up on his shoulders next to the elephants, and the elephant walked over and I got to pet it, which was pretty magical for me as well. But this game, it was an experience unlike any other. It was surreal and psychedelic, and that's influenced why I like colors and so many weird visuals and games and stuff, just because it's so influential and so different from everything else. And it's actually kind of opened up a type of horror I like, which is like the surrealist horror, where monsters don't necessarily jump out and go boo, but you know, you just see weird things, and it makes you think about yourself and stuff. I love weird visuals like that, and I love surreal, dreamlike visuals, and that's what this game gave me. And knowing that this game was the product of a company that some random people on the other side of the world who didn't even speak my language could create a experience that made me, this kid who was generally pretty miserable about everything, feel a moment of joy in his life, that meant a world to me. And that ultimately did something to me. It planted the seeds that made me want to become a game designer. It made me study how games worked and how to build them, and I started building them about when I was 7, and after 15 years of straight work, a flood destroyed all of it and left me with nothing but my passion. And I didn't have a lot of options at that point, so I decided the best course of action when all I have is my passion is to try and take it here on YouTube. And, you know, we just hit 2,000 subscribers. That's huge for me, even though, you know, I've seen channels get that in a single hour, and it's taken me almost a decade to get there. It's still a big deal to me. And say what you will about this being my career and me not being terribly successful. You know, hit up the Patreon, help support me, please. I would like my dream career to take off, like, exponentially. That would be just super. But, you know, say what you will about my levels of success in life. I can trace every single moment of my life and my career path and everything I've ever wanted to do as myself, all the way back to a single data point that is this one game, because I saw that these people who didn't even speak my language and who would never know me, they made something that changed my life, and I want to be able to do that for someone in the future, because who knows, when I'm 20, 30, maybe there'd be a kid who'd play one of my games and it would change his life. And, well, I mean, I'm doing this now, so hopefully I'm changing someone's life, and hopefully we get even more subscribers and more success and all that good stuff, because I'd really like that. But that game that changed my life and has brought me to this very point and ultimately has brought you here to me, you know, that everything in my life can be traced to this one game. That game is Nights into Dreams. It would not be any sort of exaggeration to say this game was life-changing and possibly the most important game of my life. It's certainly one of my most special games in my life. When I got my Saturn for myself as a Christmas or birthday present when I was in high school, I bought myself one game, and it was this. This is the big, complete version that comes with the 3D control pad. It's not in here right now, though. And that was a peripheral created specifically for this game because you could control it in 3D, even though the game was most of the time 2D. It was a weird game that defied any sort of convention. It wasn't a 2D platformer, it wasn't a 3D platformer, it wasn't a racing game, it wasn't anything. It was half a 3D platformer and half like a 2D scoring flight sim arcade experience. If I had to describe this in one word, it would be an experience, which is how I like to consider every single game. What sort of experience does the game bring you? And for me, Nights gave me a thing that lets me explore dreams and see amazing things that I would otherwise never see. It's the definition of why I love video games, and what this game means to me is more than I could ever put to words. Nights into Dreams is truly possibly the most important game of my life, and it's certainly the most influential game in my life. It's the reason I'm here now talking to you. I love this game a whole lot, and I'm sad we never got a proper sequel. Like, we got remakes, we got a new thing, we got the ports on like 360, we got one on Steam. Those are ports of this game, and they're not great ports. There's the Wii sort of sequel, but even then they changed so much about the formula that it's basically unrecognizable. And I'm not just talking about the fact they added voice acting. The fact is, we've never had a real proper sequel to Nights that was just the pure experience this was, and that is truly a shame. But this is also exactly why I love the Sega Saturn. Because Nights, back in the day, could not exist on anything else. It was only on the Saturn. And since then, it's been ported to quite a lot of things so everyone can play it at relatively less expense. I mean, hell, I'm pretty sure my Steam version was free, but I think everyone needs to play this, especially if you have the Saturn, because it is just very personally important to me, because it was life-changing. And that is my entire Sega Saturn collection. I'd like it to be a lot bigger. I'd like my Satiator to work. I'd like to continue showing off more, but I hope you enjoyed, and I hope at least a little bit of my love for the greatest console of all time, the Sega Saturn, has come through. I hope you all enjoyed, and hey, maybe you can tell me what your favorite stuff in my collection is, and what your favorite Saturn games are, and what your most important games are. in the comments, because that's what that place is for. I'd also appreciate if you subscribed, liked, did all that good stuff to help make my channel bigger, because I've been at this for basically a decade and I'm still clawing my way up slowly, and I'd like to have a slightly easier time of it if that were at all possible. That'd be nice. You know, hit up the Patreon, that would be good, because, you know, being able to afford stuff and, you know, actually get paid to do my job is real nice as well. Seriously, I can't thank all of you fantastic people who have subscribed to this show over the years enough. All the people who've supported me. But again, if you didn't, you know, maybe consider it. Maybe join the small legion we're creating here. But I hope you enjoyed. And, you know, if you did, follow the show, and maybe you'll learn about a whole bunch of other games I talked about and love. And maybe my passion will rub off on you a little bit, and you'll get to find some whole new games to go explore and love yourself. That's ultimately what I'm here for. It's my biggest passion. It's all I ever really wanted to do with myself, and I pour every ounce of myself into all this, and I really hope it does reach some people in a meaningful way. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, Internet.